There are days when nature whispers, and there are days when nature speaks so loudly that the world has no choice but to listen. Today is one of those days. Across the land, two powerful forces that seem like complete opposites are arriving at the same moment. Fire and water, destruction and chaos, heat and storm are colliding in a way that feels almost impossible to imagine. What many are calling the perfect storm is no longer a distant warning. It is happening now, and its impact is becoming impossible to ignore. In one region, wildfires are spreading with frightening speed. Dry winds push flames across forests, fields, and neighborhoods, turning peaceful landscapes into scenes of orange skies and falling ash. Families who woke up expecting an ordinary day are now gathering what they can carry and leaving behind homes filled with memories. The air itself becomes dangerous, thick with smoke that burns the lungs and turns daylight into an eerie twilight. Firefighters stand at the front lines, battling walls of heat that seem to create their own weather, as the flames leap unpredictably from one place to another. At the very same time, in nearby communities, another disaster is unfolding. Heavy rain is falling faster than the ground can absorb it. Streets are turning into rivers. Cars are disappearing beneath rising water. Homes that escaped the flames are now facing floodwaters creeping through their doors. Creeks become torrents, and calm neighborhoods transform into emergency zones within hours. For many people, survival has become a race against two different disasters at once. What makes this moment so extraordinary is not simply the presence of wildfire or flooding alone. It is the collision of both. The same atmosphere that feeds extreme fire behavior can also create violent storms. Heat rising from scorched earth can combine with unstable air, producing sudden downpours that fall onto land already damaged by flames. And when wildfire burns away vegetation, the soil loses its ability to hold water. Instead of soaking into the earth, rain rushes downhill, carrying mud, debris, and ash into towns below. The result is a dangerous chain reaction where one disaster strengthens the next. This is what makes today's outbreak feel different. It is not one emergency replacing another. It is multiple disasters feeding each other, creating a cycle that tests communities in ways few have ever experienced. Emergency crews must divide their attention. Roads closed by fire may also be blocked by floodwater. Shelters for evacuees can quickly become overcrowded. Communication becomes harder. Fear grows heavier, and people who were already exhausted from one crisis suddenly find themselves facing another. Yet even in moments like this, something powerful emerges. In the middle of smoke and rain, people begin to show who they truly are. Neighbors help neighbors. Strangers open their doors. Rescue teams work through impossible conditions. Communities that once felt ordinary become extraordinary through courage. When the forces of nature seem overwhelming, the strength of human compassion often becomes even stronger. Days like this remind us that the world can change in a single afternoon. Clear skies can become dark, calm can become crisis, and the things people often take for granted can suddenly feel precious. Safety, shelter, clean air, dry ground, and the presence of loved ones can become the only things that matter. The perfect storm is not only a story about destruction, it is also a reminder. It reminds us that nature does not follow human expectations. It reminds us that preparation matters. And most importantly, it reminds us that even when fire and flood collide, the human spirit can still rise in the middle of the storm. Wildfires and floods are happening at the same time. Two opposite natural disasters, fire and water, are striking together, creating a rare and dangerous situation. What makes this moment so alarming is the fact that two completely different disasters are unfolding at the same time. Wildfires and floods are usually seen as separate events, each with its own warning signs and dangers. Fire belongs to heat, dryness, and wind, while floods are tied to rain, rising water, and powerful storms. Most people imagine these forces as opposites that could never exist side by side. Yet today, many communities are facing both at once, creating a crisis that feels almost unreal. In some areas, flames are racing across dry hillsides and forests, consuming everything in their path. Thick smoke fills the air, making it difficult to breathe and reducing visibility for miles. People who were watching the fire from a distance suddenly find it much closer than expected. Strong winds can push embers far ahead of the main blaze, starting new fires in places that once seemed safe. Families are being told to evacuate with little time to prepare, carrying only the essentials while leaving behind homes, possessions, and memories. The emotional weight of such a moment is difficult to describe because people are not only escaping a fire, they are leaving behind a part of their lives. At the same time, nearby communities are facing a very different kind of danger. Dark clouds gather, and heavy rain begins to fall over land that can no longer absorb water properly. Roads become flooded within minutes, and low-lying neighborhoods quickly fill with water. Storm drains overflow, streams rise beyond their banks, and streets become dangerous currents. Some residents who escaped the smoke are now watching water enter their homes. Others find themselves trapped because evacuation routes that were open just hours earlier are now underwater. What began as one emergency suddenly becomes two. The collision of these disasters creates confusion and fear because people are forced to think about survival in more than one way. Emergency crews must respond to fire zones while also rescuing people from floodwaters. Shelters fill with those displaced by both events. Communication becomes harder as power outages spread and roads close. Even experienced responders can be challenged by a situation this unusual. For many people, the hardest part is the shock of seeing nature break the rules they thought they understood. Fire and water are not supposed to arrive together in such a destructive way. Yet this rare combination shows how quickly conditions can change. It reminds communities that modern disasters are becoming more complex, more unpredictable, and more dangerous than many ever imagined possible. Wildfires are spreading rapidly. Strong winds, dry land, and intense heat are causing flames to move quickly, forcing families to evacuate. The speed at which wildfires can spread is one of the most terrifying parts of this crisis. What begins as a small spark can become a massive wall of flames in a matter of hours when the conditions are right. Dry vegetation, low humidity, and powerful winds create the perfect environment for fire to move rapidly across forests, grasslands, and neighborhoods. In today's outbreak, those conditions have turned ordinary landscapes into dangerous zones where every gust of wind can change the direction of destruction. For many families, the day may have started like any other. The sky may have looked clear in the morning and the air may have seemed calm. But wildfires can change everything with shocking speed. As flames move through dry land, they generate intense heat that can create their own weather patterns. Hot air rises quickly, pulling in more oxygen from the surrounding area and feeding the fire even further. This makes the blaze stronger, faster, and harder to predict. In some cases, burning embers can travel miles ahead of the main fire, landing on rooftops, trees, and fields, creating entirely new fires far from the original source. The smoke itself becomes another threat. Thick clouds of ash can spread across entire towns, turning bright daylight into a dim orange haze. Breathing becomes difficult, especially for children, older adults, and people with health problems. Even those far from the flames can feel the effects in their lungs and eyes. The air can become so dangerous that simply stepping outside becomes a risk. Visibility drops sharply, making roads more dangerous and slowing evacuation efforts when every second matters. Firefighters face enormous challenges during events like this. They are not only fighting flames, but also battling unpredictable winds, extreme temperatures, and difficult terrain. Some fires can jump roads, rivers, and fire lines that were meant to contain them. Crews often work for long hours with little rest, knowing that a single shift in weather can undo hours of progress. Their task becomes even more difficult when communities are spread across large areas and resources are stretched thin. For the people forced to flee, the emotional toll can be overwhelming. Many leave home not knowing if anything will be standing when they return. They take what they can in a few hurried moments, often choosing photographs, important documents, and family keepsakes over everything else. Wildfires do more than burn land. They create fear, uncertainty, and loss that can remain long after the flames are gone. Today's outbreak is another reminder of how quickly nature can transform a peaceful place into a scene of survival. Flooding is creating sudden destruction. Heavy rain is turning roads into rivers, damaging homes and trapping people in rising water. While wildfires are consuming one part of the landscape, flooding is creating a completely different kind of destruction in another. Unlike fire, which can often be seen approaching from a distance, floodwater can rise with frightening speed and leave people with very little time to react. What begins as heavy rain can quickly turn into a life-threatening emergency when streets, rivers, and drainage systems can no longer handle the volume of water. In today's outbreak, many communities are discovering that too much water can be just as dangerous as too much fire. Rain falling on already damaged land creates an even greater problem. When vegetation has been burned away by wildfire, the ground loses its natural ability to absorb moisture. Trees, plants, and roots normally help hold soil in place and allow water to slowly sink into the earth. But after a fire, the soil can become hard and almost water-resistant. Instead of soaking in, rain rushes across the surface, picking up ash, dirt, rocks, and debris as it moves downhill. This can transform a normal rainstorm into a sudden and violent flood. Roads can disappear beneath water in minutes. Drivers who believe they can cross a flooded street may suddenly find their vehicles swept away by a current stronger than it appears. Homes can fill with muddy water before families have time to protect their belongings. Basements become traps, power can fail without warning, and emergency responders may struggle to reach those in need. In low-lying neighborhoods, people often watch helplessly as water rises step by step through their homes, damaging everything it touches. The danger of floodwater is often underestimated because it can seem calm on the surface. But even shallow water can carry enough force to knock a person down or move a vehicle. Hidden debris, contaminated water, and fast-moving currents can turn a simple escape into a deadly situation. People who have already evacuated from wildfire zones may find themselves facing another emergency when shelters, roads, or nearby areas become flooded. For families caught in the middle of this, the emotional strain can be overwhelming. Escaping one disaster is already painful, but facing another immediately afterward can feel unbearable. Some lose possessions to fire, while others lose them to water. Some leave home to avoid smoke only to find themselves trapped by rising streets. The stress of not knowing what comes next can weigh heavily on entire communities. Flooding in today's outbreak is not just another weather event. It is part of a larger crisis that shows how multiple disasters can strike at once. It reveals how quickly survival can depend on both preparation and timing, and how fragile everyday life can become when nature suddenly changes course. One disaster is making the other worse. Burned land cannot absorb rain properly, causing mudslides, flash floods, and greater damage after fires. One of the most dangerous parts of today's outbreak is the way one disaster is making the other even worse. Wildfires and floods are not simply happening at the same time by coincidence. In many cases, they are connected in ways that create a far more destructive chain of events. What begins as a fire can prepare the ground for a flood, and what follows can become more devastating than either disaster alone. This is why so many experts describe this situation as more than just severe weather. It is a collision of forces that multiply each other's damage. When a wildfire burns through a forest or hillside, it does more than destroy trees and vegetation. The intense heat can actually change the soil itself. In some cases, the fire creates a hardened layer beneath the surface that repels water instead of absorbing it. Under normal conditions, rain would slowly soak into the ground, where roots and plants help control the flow. But after a wildfire, the landscape can behave like concrete. Even a short period of heavy rain can send water rushing across the burned earth at dangerous speeds. As the water moves downhill, it carries ash, loose soil, broken branches, and rocks with it. This can create powerful mudslides and debris flows that are often more destructive than ordinary flooding. Entire roads can be buried, bridges can be weakened or destroyed. Homes that survive the flames can suddenly be hit by thick waves of mud and water. Residents who believed the fire had passed may find themselves facing a second disaster just days or even hours later. the danger does not end when the smoke clears. In many ways, the risk continues long after the flames are gone. Emergency responders face a nearly impossible challenge in these conditions. Fire crews may still be battling active flames while rescue teams are responding to flood calls nearby. Resources that would normally focus on one emergency must now be divided between several. Roads closed by fire can prevent help from reaching flooded communities, while washed-out roads can stop crews from accessing fire zones. Communication systems can also become strained as power outages spread across larger areas. Every part of the response becomes more complicated because the disasters are feeding into each other. For communities living through this, the uncertainty can be exhausting. People are not only watching one threat, they are trying to understand how quickly another could follow. A storm that might normally bring relief from fire can instead create a new danger. Rain that seems like a blessing can become a source of destruction. This unusual connection between fire and flood reminds people that disasters no longer always arrive one at a time. Sometimes nature creates a sequence so complex that survival depends on recognizing how one crisis can silently become the next. Human strength shines during crisis despite the chaos. Communities, firefighters, and rescue teams show courage, unity, and compassion. In the middle of destruction, one of the most powerful things to emerge is the strength of people. When communities are faced with fire, flood, and uncertainty all at once, human character often becomes most visible. Buildings can be damaged, roads can disappear, and daily life can be turned upside down. But the ability of people to stand together often becomes stronger than the disaster itself. In moments when nature feels overwhelming, compassion can become a force that no storm can wash away. When evacuation orders are given, many people leave with fear in their hearts, uncertain if they will ever see their homes the same way again. Yet even while dealing with their own losses, some still stop to help neighbors pack belongings, assist older residents, or guide families to safety. Strangers who have never spoken before suddenly become a source of support for one another. A simple act like opening a door, sharing food, or offering a ride can mean everything to someone who has lost their sense of security. In times of crisis, ordinary people often become the quiet heroes no one expected. Firefighters, rescue crews, and emergency workers also show extraordinary courage during events like this. They enter dangerous areas while others are trying to escape. They work through smoke that burns the lungs, through floodwaters that can hide deadly hazards, and through exhaustion that most people cannot imagine. Many of them spend long hours without rest because they know every minute could mean the difference between life and death for someone else. Their commitment reflects a deeper truth, that even when disaster strikes, there are always people willing to risk their own safety to protect others. Communities often discover a kind of unity that may not have existed before. Schools can become shelters, local businesses can turn into supply centers, volunteers can organize donations for families who have lost everything. Social media can become a lifeline where people share updates, warnings, and requests for help. In a world where people can sometimes feel divided, disasters often reveal how deeply connected communities really are. The lines that separate strangers can disappear when survival becomes something shared. For those living through today's outbreak, the emotional scars may remain long after the fire is extinguished and the floodwaters recede. Homes can be rebuilt, roads can be repaired, and landscapes can slowly recover. But the memory of such a day can stay for years. Yet many survivors often remember not only the fear, but also the kindness they witnessed. They remember the hand that reached for them, the voice that reassured them, and the people who refused to let them face the storm alone. That is what makes human resilience so remarkable. Even when fire and flood collide, the human spirit can still rise above both, proving that in the darkest moments, people can become each other's greatest source of hope.